Pittsburgh Steelers inside linebacker Patrick Queen took his villain role and his comments to another level, ripping the Ravens, the city of Baltimore, and food. All that and more coming up next on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens, where I come to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, as always, for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and in audio form wherever you get your shows. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We're on Locked On Ravens here 5 days per week, giving you Ravens content. So we have news for you, analysis, updates. There is a lot that we do during the season, in the off season, lull periods. We're here for you regardless, Monday through Friday here on the show. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow along. And if you like to listen in audio form or watch in video form, it's the same show, both audio and video for all the everydayers out there. Listen every single day. Thank you for tuning in and being a part of my journey here. If you're new to the show, welcome in. Hopefully you become a part of that journey. And then for anybody in the middle, welcome back. You know, sometimes the show topics or things you're going to talk about just kind of come to you, where during this lull period, sometimes it's like, all right, what are we going to talk about today? What do I have cooking up for the show? And let's just say that, again, this show essentially fell right into my lap. And the comments that we heard from Patrick Queen yesterday, the article came out from The Athletic. Spicy comments. This is not the first time, or honestly the second, or I think the third we've talked about Patrick Queen and him embracing the villain role in Pittsburgh. But he took his comments to another level. And there's just so much to dissect in this situation. We're going to get to it all here today. In the first part of the show, we're going to be getting into just the general overall comments and the article. Queen ripping on the Ravens, ripping on Baltimore. Then we're going to take a little break from that, move into some updated OTA storylines. Obviously, Lamar Jackson is a big part of that. We're not going to spend too much time on that. There were some more opinions put out yesterday on Lamar missing OTAs, but We'll address it, but we addressed it a lot yesterday, so I want to just focus more so on the other positional groups and just other storylines in general. Then we'll move back into Patrick Queen and talk about his take on Baltimore food. So a Patrick Queen sandwich here today. Patrick Queen in the first segment, Patrick Queen in the third segment, little quote-unquote intermission in the second part of the show. So you want to stay tuned for that final part of the show, because we're gonna talk about Baltimore food versus Pittsburgh food versus food in general, all relating, of course, back to what Patrick Queen had to say. So let's start here with Patrick Queen's comments. Now, the article, again, was done by The Athletic, came out yesterday, and honestly wasn't really picked up that much. I think, I saw the quote. I think The Athletic put out the graphic, and I think another site did it as well, but really wasn't picked up by the time I had seen it. And so I looked at the article, I got the quote, and there are actually multiple tiers of quotes in this. The one I highlighted, I only did one quote. So Mark Caboli of The Athletic, shout out to him for the article here. The one that I ended up putting out and getting on Twitter, that's where I put it, was he said, quote, "It's a better atmosphere here for me. Everybody is cool. The people are cool. The players are cool. And the food spots are better. I'm a big food guy. I love food. I'm more of a true food guy rather than a seafood guy. I like meat and stuff like that. It's just a better atmosphere for me here." And he said it was a no-brainer to join Pittsburgh. There's another quote in here that says, quote, "It's everything that you want. You have a great head coach, defense, you can ball and put you in a situation to succeed. I'm at a point where I want to win. I know Pittsburgh hasn't won anything in a while, but they were in the playoffs, so they have a chance. To me, the team got better at every position. It's just now at the point where we have to go do it." So let's break this down. We'll split it into sections. The first part, the first quote. I mean, I don't really understand the atmosphere that Queen is talking about. Like, obviously, Pittsburgh is a very highly respected organization throughout the NFL. I mean, Baltimore and Pittsburgh have a lot of similarities in terms of that, where when you talk about, all right, where are the highly respected organizations in the league, I think people would put Pittsburgh up there. Baltimore, obviously, is near or maybe at the top of that list. But I don't know. Again, like, was Baltimore's atmosphere so bad that he's like, oh, it's a better atmosphere for me? I mean, is he talking about the fans? He did get a lot of hate from Baltimore fans, especially over the first couple of years of his career. So is he talking about, oh, there's just not as much pressure from the fans or performance-based? I don't really know what he's talking about atmosphere-wise, because, I mean, Baltimore's a pretty good place to play. It's a really great place to play, honestly. So I don't know where that comes from. I'm sure there's a deeper meaning behind it, but if I had to guess, and again, this is, he didn't say this outright, but I would have to assume that, oh, there's just not as much pressure, not as much fan hate, I guess. Queen didn't live up to expectations over the first 2 years of his career. All right. I think he was starting to turn it on a little bit before Roquan came in, but obviously Roquan came in, and I think that elevated his game, much like everybody else on the defense. But there are expectations at that middle linebacker position. One, because the Ravens are a contending team, and two, who was the second draft pick in the franchise's history? It was Ray Lewis. It's Ray Lewis. And so whenever an inside linebacker comes in, especially a first-round inside linebacker, C.J. Mosley, sky-high expectations. Whenever there is a first-round inside linebacker, those expectations are always going to be there, whether fair or not, right? Queen didn't have the typical rookie offseason and whatnot. Didn't start a ton at LSU. There are those facts, but I think that we can say, yes, he got better over the third and fourth years of that deal because Roquan was there, but he was starting to put a little bit together before he got there. I just don't know. We'll never know how much that ascension would have continued, but the Roquan bump definitely was real. Not taking away from what Patrick Queen did, but Roquan elevated everybody on that defense, and of course that includes Patrick Queen. Now, it's just, I don't really get, like, we'll talk about the food thing later, but saying, everybody's cool, people are cool, players are cool, okay, like, that's great. Like, does he mean atmosphere in terms of Pittsburgh versus Baltimore? Like, did he hate being in Baltimore so much? Just like the atmosphere around the city? Like, because he's saying everybody's cool, people are cool, players are cool, food spots are better. So it's food spots. Okay, so you're talking about the city at that point. He goes, I'm a big food guy, I love food, more of a true food guy rather than a seafood guy. I mean, this is a preview for the final part of the show, but like, when did we draw the line between, like, what is true food? Like, isn't all food true? You eat it, isn't that true food? Like, seafood isn't a category. He says meat, and that can be, if you want to put that in a category, fine. Vegetables category. You have categories of food, but are we just saying everything is true food but seafood and maybe a couple other categories? I mean, where was that line drawn? Plus, he goes fishing all the time. So I know that is, bass fishing and it's catch and release type deal, but I'm sure he's cooked a fish and eaten a fish, right? I'm sure he's done that. He fishes a lot. It's something he really enjoys to do. So I just, it's interesting the way that he approached this. Like, we know that he's taking on the villain role. We know that that's the role he wants to assume. He wants this to be look, I don't even, like, is it for attention? Is it, was there really like some terrible way that this whole thing went down between him and the organization? We know Patrick Queen's a player that likes to play with a chip on his shoulder. He has a chip on his shoulder. We saw that over his 4 years in Baltimore. I think the villain comments in his opening press conference, fine. Spicy, but fine. But I think we've seen Patrick Queen continue with the comments and continue with the, here's why I left Baltimore. Here's why I didn't like Baltimore. Again, and in this article, I do want to preface it. I want to make sure that I make this clear, that he said that, look, he's been a matter-of-fact guy, but he ended up saying, when he was reminded that his words might not be received well in the city, in Baltimore here, he said, I don't care, it's the truth. I'm not saying anything bad about them. I'm just speaking the truth. So, I mean, he certainly feels some type of way about either how his tenure ended with the team. I don't think he signed with Pittsburgh out of spite. I think that wouldn't be a smart decision. If you sign with a team out of spite and not what's best for your career, I just think that's a poor decision. But there's just so much here where it's been thing after thing after thing after thing. If you want to play the villain role, fine. I think, honestly, the Ravens-Steelers rivalry is better for it, right? Like, there hasn't been as much juice recently in that rivalry. And so if Queen wants to assume a villain role and kind of have that spotlight, then okay. Like, I'm fine with that. But it just feels like we're having the same conversation every month or every 3 weeks about, oh, here's what Patrick Queen said about the Ravens again. And it's just like, we get it. We understand. But now it's just like, okay, now we're taking shots at the city and the food situation. Like, it just feels like there are a limited amount of topics that can be talked about for Patrick Queen here, and he's running out of them, and he's trying to bring new ones into it. So, again, Queen was a Pro Bowler in Baltimore, right? He was someone that excelled in his final 2 years with the team. He earned the contract he got from Pittsburgh. He's made it clear about, the situation he's in. He's happy in Pittsburgh. Fine. Great. That's awesome. But again, there was always going to be, when Patrick Queen kind of had, okay, yes, I'm going to sign with Pittsburgh, there was always this thing of, he had to have known that, yes, there was going to be controversy about it. And sure, I mean, Baltimore fans were hard on him over his time with the team. And I think, that has spilled over into his short tenure in Pittsburgh. But if you're talking about atmosphere, there has to be a specific meaning to that, whether it is the organizational atmosphere, the city atmosphere, the fan base atmosphere. Is it a combination of a bunch of those things? I'm sure that Patrick Queen has a huge chip on his shoulder from not being paid by the Ravens, but to say a bunch of this different stuff and have said it for so long now, it feels like, again, it's just like the same thing over and over and over again. I'm not sure. I mean, is this it? Is this the last we're going to hear of it before the rivalry? I'm probably not. Like, the way it's going, probably not. So very spicy comments from Patrick Queen. We'll come up in the second part of the show. We're going to take a brief intermission from that and talk about some updated OTA storylines. Baltimore in the midst of their final week of OTAs right now before mandatory minicamp kicks off. We'll talk a tad about Lamar Jackson, but also about some other storylines to keep an eye on. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about here on the show. First, this show is brought to you by Gametime. And so for me, I'm super excited about the NBA Finals. It'd be super cool to go to a game too. We got Celtics, we got Mavericks here in the finals starting on Thursday. So Gametime makes it super easy. The NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to tip off. With killer last minute deals, all in prices, view some receipt, and the lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. And so you have on the Gametime app a ton of different, really incredible features, honestly. There are a bunch that I'm a fan of, and my favorite is last-minute deals. You can save with 6% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, comedy, concerts, and so much more. And not only that, the Gametime app, it's really easy to use, too. It's a really great experience because it's just easy to navigate, and that, to me, is a really important part of apps. So you got flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, seat views. You have lowest price guarantee, game time ticket coverage, and so much more. So for me, if I were to go to an NBA Finals game, I'd probably say a closeout game. But as I've said, those are hard to predict. So opening game one, I think that's where I'd probably go if I had the choice. Take the guesswork into buying NBA Finals tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Join us by again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. Spell LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime for last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back, our second segment here of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Taco Tuesday. Speaking of tacos, we're going to be talking about food in the final part of the show. So if you want to stay tuned for that, going to be a really interesting conversation about Baltimore food versus Pittsburgh food, because Patrick Queen just had to bring that up. So we just have to talk about it here on Locked On Ravens. I was debating just making the Patrick Queen thing the first two segments and doing storylines in the third, but I figured let's just talk football the first couple of segments. Obviously, the food conversation is not necessarily super football related. And plus, we can, again, have the brief intermission of talking about OTAs, and then we'll do Patrick Queen on the first segment, which we just did, and then we'll have the other Patrick Queen part in the final part of the show. So could have gone either way, but I decided on what we're doing here, so that's what we're doing. Updated OTA storylines. We had a very at-length conversation yesterday about Lamar Jackson and his absence from OTAs. He attended the first one, and he was there for the first week and has not attended since. We had a conversation about that specifically because the conversation and the controversy erupted because of Mike Florio over the weekend, where it just feels like, okay, it's done. It's over. Like, who cares at this point? Like, some people have the opinion of Lamar should be there, and it's a travesty he's not, and it's horrible that he's not. Other people are just like, okay, whatever. It's voluntary. It's not mandatory. Like, to me, it is voluntary. I mean, I'm not going to rip a guy for not being there for something that is voluntary. Would I love for Lamar to be there? Absolutely. Right. If it was my decision, I'd love for Lamar to be there. I think that, for me, it's a very fine line because at the end of the day, if it's voluntary, you don't have to show up. And it's not like Lamar's not doing anything when he's not there. He has literally been working out with Zay Flowers down in Florida. And he's been working out other places too. He has been working. It's not like he's just relaxing 24/7 and just not doing anything. It'd be awesome for him to get reps at the facility, right? The coaching staff and everything. But there have been even more comments. I have not seen, this really only happened. It's not only Lamar, but it feels like it only happens with Lamar. I understand it's not just him. But, this year it is. This year it's only Lamar, where there have been plenty of vets not attending OTAs. There are plenty of vets that don't do it every single season. Now, I know Lamar's not in a contract year, right? We're way far past that now. But Plaxico Burress, who's a former NFL wide receiver, played for the Giants, the Steelers, etc., ended up talking about it a little bit and said that he was not a fan of what Lamar Jackson is doing. And his exact quote is, "For Lamar Jackson not to be there and Derrick Henry is there with his new team, I think it sends the wrong message. When your starting QB is there, everybody is basically there." Which actually is not true, the second part of that. There are still plenty of vets that miss, even though your starting quarterback is there. Maybe there's a better attendance rate, but it's not like I don't believe everybody on every team, if your starting quarterback is there, that he's going to be there. Yes, Derrick Henry's there with his new team. He's working out, and that's his choice, right? If Derrick Henry did not show up to OTAs, that would also be his choice. It's the same thing with Lamar, and it just feels like we're having the same conversation over and over again, right? Where it's like we addressed the Mike Florio thing yesterday. We talked about, his absences last week too, and after that, we're like, okay, we're done with that, right? There's nothing else to talk about. And then it's another storyline on another storyline about the same conversation. So that's why I'm not going to talk about it for the full segment here. I'll acknowledge again, I don't think what Plaxico is saying here is correct. Again, a lot of people would love Lamar to be there. I would love Lamar to be there. John Harbaugh would probably love Lamar to be there. He was asked about it. He said, I can't comment and comment about the guys that are there. That to me sends a message of, he wants everybody to be there. And I'm pretty sure that every organization wants every player to be at their voluntary stuff. But here's the thing. It's voluntary, so you don't have to show up. Then there was another comment from Chris Sims, who works with Mike Florio. And he said, quote, "I want Lamar to be as great as he possibly can be, and I know he's already great. I don't get it, though. Off the playoff loss and the letdown, I'm very surprised by this take by Lamar." Also talked about how, there's a bunch of quarterbacks in the AFC who are competing, and talked about how, look, you can buy, he said, you can buy me a Rolls Royce, save some of that money, because obviously the conversation that came out was about, oh, Lamar's losing $750,000 because he's not showing up to OTAs. It's just, look, $750,000 in the grand scheme of things is a lot of money. To Lamar Jackson, that's probably not a lot of money, which is crazy to think about, but he signed a $260 million contract, right? So in the grand scheme of things, $750,000 to him is not like a crazy amount of money, which again, I just feel so weird saying. So he can do with his money what he wants. That obviously that escalator was in that deal. He understood that and decided not to go with it. So it's a conversation that, again, I'm not going to give energy to in terms of repeating the same thing over and over again, like talking about what we said yesterday and before that over the weekend or before the weekend. So again, I think that it's whatever. I don't think it should be a storyline. I don't think it should be that big of a storyline. You can maybe talk about it once, but here we are talking about it for the third straight day. Feels like Lamar Jackson's contract all over again, because it just feels like it's the same storyline about the same thing, and there's just differentiation because it's, oh, this person said that and this person said that. So we will talk about it here because it's important to talk about, but I just want to keep shedding light on the fact that this is not a big deal. And while everybody's out there talking about how big of a deal it is, I will come on this platform and say, hey, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I'd love for him to be there, but he's not, and it's voluntary. So to me, that's that. Other storylines in OTAs for the Ravens. I know attendance is huge, not just away from Lamar. Like, attendance is always huge for everybody. This is the last week of OTAs for Baltimore. There's really not a lot you can take away from OTAs. Like, this is just a bunch of on-air stuff. It's it's really the first step in the acclimation process for newer guys, for rookies. It is really for the younger guys, like seeing how they can get acclimated, how quickly, where guys are, what skill sets guys have. Does this guy have what you thought they have? Do they need to improve on this? So some of the younger players, Roger Rosengarten, Devontae Walker, obviously players like Nate Wiggins and all those guys as well. Well, also, I'm curious to see if Adisa Isaac will participate this week because he suffered an injury. Same thing with Bo Braid. There have been a couple of injuries already so far. So what's the status on those guys? But again, OTAs, it's fun to talk about. First couple days are fun to talk about, but especially with guys like Lamar not there, it's like, you're not going to overanalyze everything in June about that. So storylines are big. Like, you can talk about how should the Ravens bring in safety depth? How is Sanusi Kane looking? And if Bo Braid plays, how is Bo Braid looking? Or Darius Washington? Some of these guys who might be on the either roster bubble or positional bubble in terms of just their roles. So it is an interesting conversation to have, and like it's fun. But I personally am not reading too much into OTAs. Obviously, once training camp starts, that will be when the fun really begins with positional battles. And before that, obviously, there's going to be a quote-unquote dark period after minicamp. So we're going to be doing all of our previews, storylines, and all of that over the next month or so as we wait for training camp to start. But OTAs, it's more for the younger players and to figure out what the guys have. So that's where the storylines are for the younger guys, the rookie class, second-year guys. And I think that actually helps out in terms of what the Ravens are looking for right now, because they're going to be relying on a lot of second-year guys, third-year guys, fourth-year guys, etc. So coming up with the final part of the show, we will resume our Patrick Queen conversation and talk about not necessarily football, but food and Patrick Queen's take on that. So be sure to stay tuned, plenty to talk about here on the show. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's going to take all the time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big one of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked and make every playoff shot count. So in the playoffs, obviously, we got the NBA Finals going on with the Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks. So if you want to bet Luka Doncic props, Jason Tatum props, Jaylen Brown, you can go even Kyrie Irving. You can do all that over on FanDuel. Plus, for the football season, the Ravens open up with the Chiefs in week 1. Over on FanDuel, Ravens open up with 2.5-point underdogs. So if you want to get in on that action early, I'm sure the line will be changing as things happen, but get on that action over at FanDuel. FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Tuesday. Thank you again for making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every day. I really do appreciate it. Be sure to also check out Locked On Sports Today over on the Locked On Podcast Network here. Peter Bukowski does an amazing job giving you the biggest storylines throughout all of sports 5 days per week. So again, check out Locked On Sports Today, part of Locked On Podcast Network here, your team every single day. And here on Locked On Ravens, we're here to provide you 5 days a week of daily Baltimore Ravens content and coverage, plus more. We do live shows after every single Ravens game, every piece of big news as well. Also, we do it after we're going to actually start a new segment here up. It's not going to be live, but we're going to be doing on the weekends, every game day. We'll have the game day episode out at 6 a.m. doing our final preview of that game. So excited to debut that. Obviously, we won't do that for preseason, but once we get into the regular season and hopefully playoffs, hopefully Super Bowl, we'll get that as well. Now, the more interesting part of the Patrick Queen comments was his take on the food. And it very, I'd say, unconventional about just comments for a player about, the atmosphere is better, the food is better. And you're just like, oh, well, okay. And that's it. That's everybody's opinion. I'm sure there are going to be people in here. This is Locked On Ravens, so I'd assume there are mostly Baltimore people in here listening to this show. But if you are a fan of the Pittsburgh food over the Baltimore food, I'm not necessarily going to blame you for that. Now, I personally don't really know the Pittsburgh food scene that well. I've tried to do my research, and I actually have done my research a little bit based off of what I have seen. Now, pierogies in Pittsburgh seem to be the big thing. And I like pierogies, right? Pierogies are great. But is Patrick Queen going to Pittsburgh and being like, yeah, the food's better because of the pierogies? Or, there's a cookie croissant that's known in Pittsburgh. And you're like, okay, cookie croissant. But the thing that I'm looking at right here is a Primanti sandwich. And it is, what the Primanti bros did. It's the Pittsburgh, it's the famous sandwich there, which is fine, right? That's great. You have a famous sandwich. But in Maryland, the famous food is crab cakes. And the point, I'm part of the Ryan Ripton show, and we had this debate on the Ryan Ripton show yesterday. It was actually a very fun conversation. It was spirited as well. So if you haven't, be sure to check that out. To me, it's like Maryland crab cakes. Buffalo, you get the wings, right? Kansas City, the barbecue. New England, you get the clam chowder. In grocery stores or in restaurants, it is that, right? In a restaurant in Los Angeles, or in a restaurant in Florida or New York or wherever, if there's a crab cake It's not always going to be this way, but you sometimes see, oh, we have a Maryland crab cake on our menu, or you can get that in the grocery store. You can get, buffalo wings, or you can get the New England clam chowder. That's how that works. I've never seen Pittsburgh pierogies anywhere. So when we're talking about which food scene is better, Baltimore or Pittsburgh, which food scene is more iconic? I mean, Baltimore is known for their seafood, for crabs, for Old Bay even, right? The spices, the Old Bay, which is iconic in Baltimore and just Maryland in general. I mean, I'm looking here, and I personally don't count. Like, as good as the Primanti sandwich might be, I'm not trying to rag on it or anything. Like, I've never had one, so I can't say whether it's good or not. But I give it more okay. Pierogies are an item, right? That's a unique food. The sandwich, I don't necessarily count that, right? I don't know the lore behind the sandwich, but I'm not counting a sandwich as a food. Now, Patrick Queen could have had incredible meals in Pittsburgh and, that whole situation. Oh, the meals I've had in Pittsburgh are better than Baltimore. Restaurants in Pittsburgh, whatever that is. I don't even know that. But I don't count, like here, the Pittsburgh salad also is one that is very controversial. We had this debate on the Ryan Ripken show. The Pittsburgh salad is apparently French fries on a salad. French fries, two sides. You're combining two sides. So I don't count that. I don't. It's fries and it's a salad. Crab cakes, you make crab cakes. Pierogies, you make pierogies. Pittsburgh salad, you just toss fries on a salad. Sandwich, you make the sandwich. Like I give the sandwich more of a track record than the Pittsburgh salad, but it's okay. You're going to a restaurant to get this food item. You're going to this restaurant to get this food item. Here's a tea place. Here's a dessert place that has great items. That's great. But for Patrick Queen to say, oh yeah, the food is better, and then to say, oh well, I'm a pure meats guy, not a seafood guy. Pittsburgh isn't known for meat. Like, sure, if Patrick Queen likes meat more than seafood, that's fine. But Baltimore is known for the seafood. So I don't know. Queen is playing the villain role. I don't know why he'd bring food into it. I think actually the most offensive part of it for so many people was the food comment, where it's like, oh, now you really did it. So I think, I had all these food wars in my comments when I put the tweet out, and I couldn't even keep up because, there were Baltimore fans saying, yeah, there's nothing in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh fans coming back and saying, oh yeah, what are you talking about? There's so much in Pittsburgh, this, that, and the other. So to bring up the food is just kind of like, wasn't necessary. I mean, if he's having great experiences with the food in Pittsburgh, that's fine. But it's like, oh, the food is better. I think, you understand when you say that, what it's going to do, because people can get pretty defensive about the food. And I certainly saw that in the comments. So I'm not as familiar with the Pittsburgh food scene. Obviously in Philly, you have the Philly cheesesteaks and whatnot, but we're not talking about Philly. We're talking about Pittsburgh. So when I try to do this, I'm like, yeah, you know what? In Baltimore, you got the crabs, you got the Old Bay, you got the crab cakes. Again, you can get a Maryland crab cake. I know it's not a Baltimore crab cake, but I know it's kind of the same thing where, it's very interesting the way Patrick Queen brought up the food. I don't think I've ever seen something like that before. Maybe it's happened, I just haven't seen it, but a very interesting way to trash talk. I mean, it was effective. It was certainly effective. So maybe that's what he wanted all along and he got his wish, but we'll see. I think, again, it adds more fuel to the Ravens and Steelers rivalry. I think people are going to be really gearing up and waiting for that. And that first time that Derrick Henry and Patrick Queen meet in the middle will be probably the most talked about play of both Ravens and Steelers games, regardless of the outcome, right? Ravens lose. Oh, Patrick Queen, da-da-da. Ravens win. Oh, Patrick Queen, da-da-da. If the Ravens win and Patrick Queen doesn't have a good game, I think everybody here knows what's coming from a lot of the fan base. So we're going to see. Patrick Queen continues to talk. We will see if these are the last comments. Again, based off of history, which has been only the last 3 months, 4 months. I'd say probably not. But the latest chapter in the Patrick Queen controversy, we will put it to bed there. And if anything else comes of it, it will happen. I'll have a couple of guests on throughout the rest of the week, so I'll probably ask them about it. But we might have to wait. Maybe we won't have to wait long for the next Patrick Queen controversy. But I'm sure during Ravens-Steelers week, we might get a soundbite or two from Patrick Queen for sure. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in. Again, be sure to subscribe, follow along video form and audio form. If you want to listen or watch, it's the same show, both audio and video. Come up tomorrow, more Ravens content. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.